Mick Cronin all but confirming the roster is finalized. What does this mean? We'll tell you next on Locked On UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making the show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. So like, comment, and subscribe. Become an everyday listener to the Locked On UCLA podcast because, hey, just around the corner, daily shows coming just around as we get to August. Fall camp just about getting ready to start. Most importantly, Mick Cronin jumping on the Petros and Money show out in there. Show. They had an in-person event, a big show, and Mick Cronin stopped by their show, PMS. And what was important during that show is what Coach Cronin went on the record to say is that the Bruins are all but finalizing their roster officially. Coming up soon, the Bruins will announce 2 new official players to the roster, which only means that UCLA was able to finalize Adai Mara and Berke Bouyang-Tunchel. Now, something completely crazy, that would be nuts if something changed in the next week and a half. But after it's all said and done, the Bruins, let's see if I can, off the top of my noggin, remember every single player on scholarship. Let's go. You got Adem Bona returning. You've got the likes of Dylan Andrews. You've got Will McClendon. You've got Kenneth Nuba. Then you've got Jan Vide. You've got Ilan Fible. You've got the likes of Sebastian Mack, Devin Williams, Brandon Williams, Adai Mara, and then you've got Berke Bouyang-Tunchel with a roster with Lazar Stefanovic, along with some other players on the roster, that could make a very interesting year for UCLA. And while Adem Bona is still recovering, it's nice to see that there was no snag with Mara. Berke Bouyang-Tunchel was someone who the Bruins had been going after for a while. They snagged him finally. And after it's all said and done, the Bruins, despite all the crazy roster nonsense, have been able to secure a team. And while they still got to finish the assistant coaching vacancy, they got to figure that out. It's nice to see the Bruins will announce and give us an official look at what the Bruins look like for 2023 to 24. I'm not entirely sure. I've talked about it before, about which players will and will not go to the overseas trip, with Mar being announced next week. I would think that he would go, which means that all but maybe Adem Bona would be not good to go overseas and play for the Bruins exhibitions coming up in the next month, which means there's a lot of playing time up for grabs. That the Bruins finally were able to get the likes of Bouyang-Tunchel and Amara that are not official yet. Remember, it's not official. They're going to announce it, is how Cronin was able to put it. And then another big comparison he made was about Ilan Fible, comparing him to Jalen Clark on the PMS show when he made that a guest appearance earlier before the recording of this podcast, which means he has some he's got some high regard for the guys he's bringing in. And think about guys who the Bruins missed, right? They had Ron Holland late in the recruiting cycle who became available. They had Marcus Adams Jr., who was in the top 3, had UCLA in his top 3, had us all thinking he might go to UCLA, reclassified from the class of 24 to 23, went to Kansas, and has already transferred from Kansas to Gonzaga. Think of those guys who were available this late in the recruiting cycle. Not that was ever really a true thing the Bruins were going to go after, but here you are looking and seeing this Bruins team, a European flavor, a very different type of recruiting style than Mick Cronin. We've talked about it all summer long. We've been talking about it for months, especially since the end of the season in 22 to 23, where now we can finally put it together. The pieces have been on the side of the desk. Now you can finally put those final pieces in to complete the puzzle of what the roster will look like. Now, as far as minutes go, I've been debating so many times, even with the guys who were unofficially but officially part of the roster, had verbal but unofficial verbal commitments. It's going to look very interesting to start the year. Will Mick Cronin favor and give more leeway to veterans early? Who's going to win all the starting time when the season starts. How much is that going to be impacted by those first few games? Look at the non-conference. A lot of easier, very winnable, most likely blowout wins for the Bruins to start this season. How much are we going to tell from that? Will we have to wait till they go to Maui? Will we have to wait before they play in the CBS Sports Classic? When they play a true road game against Villanova? When they host Maryland? All these different games that will stack up where the Bruins will get tested. We finally know who's going to be a part of this team, and it's going to be interesting. It will be a very different year from last year. We had all the excitement, the slow build, everything coming to a head before the Clark injury, and then everything fell apart with the Bona injury and his absence in that game against Gonzaga. And now we've got an idea of what they look like. And now that it's good that all those things, probably any little hurdles academically, the contracts, finally getting pushed to the side, the Bruins can just focus on basketball. They can focus on things that don't really have to worry about recruiting. Now that Mick Cronin finally has all right, the headaches, everything, all the annoying parts about coaching in the offseason, getting all these guys even more headaches with the rigorous academic standards that UCLA upholds, and maybe even tougher for the international students having to get out of different hurdles or pass a certain exam, or in addition to that, get out of a professional contract like a Daimara has been balancing, trying to get his way to Westwood. All that can get out of the way, and Mick Cronin can do what he does best, which is just go after these players and get these players ready to play some good defense, find a way to get a good offensive rhythm, maybe shoot some more threes this year, make more threes at a better clip than they probably have in years past, with a lot more weapons, some good NBA material. We saw the Bruins tied for the most NBA draftees in this most recent draft. Is it possible with all the Europeans, all the guys coming into year 2 and maybe year 3 or 6, right? Like Anuba, you've got Bona, who could have easily been drafted if he wasn't hurt. The Bruins could be good this year. They could cycle in a lot of players in the upcoming draft, if not the 24 or 25 draft. We will be seeing a lot of UCLA in the headlines when November rolls around for college basketball. Now that's going to be remain to be seen how things play out football-wise, which we'll talk about in just a moment, because different people keep throwing different ideas as who's going to be the starting quarterback, and I want to touch on that in segment 2. But now we can see we're expecting Abuya Tunchel and Mar to be in Westwood, and now the Bruins have brought it all together, despite some big names being out there late, leaving teams. Holland with a decommitment, a transfer, quote-unquote, for Marcus Adams Jr., a local product the Bruins tried to go after before he reclassified and committed to Kansas. So many different things it seemed like were going wrong for Mick Cronin and company, and now they've got it solidified. In addition to getting a class of 24 commitment from Eric Freeney, all added in this wild month of July, it's finally come together, and now we can see what it looks like on the court, hopefully sooner rather than later with this team at full health as we wait for Bona to recover from his shoulder injury he suffered in the Pac-12 tournament. College athletics is turning itself on its head. Mick Cronin might be changing the way college basketball is recruited at the Power 5 level, regardless of what Power 5 UCLA conference the Bruins will be in, because they'll be in the Big Ten moving up. So many different things. So crazy. Everything in between. We're talking UCLA football next. Stay tuned here on the Locked On UCLA podcast. So before we like to move on and talk some football, it's like the quarterback, it's a job that's got to be won. And if you own a small business, then, hey, you're going to want to learn more about LinkedIn Jobs, because every potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain, right? Especially if you're like a Chip Kelly, all the Bruins fans, you want to be 100% certain in who the starting quarterback's going to be. While this might not be a small business decision, LinkedIn Jobs can help all you small business owners find the right people for your team faster and for free. You can use screening tools that can focus and pinpoint those candidates that have the right skills, the perfect experience, that can quickly prioritize the guys and ladies and every possible candidate that you'd like to interview and hire. Small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Cruising on into segment 2 of the Locked On UCLA podcast. Again, we're going to be debating this and talking about this, so you're going to think I'm a broken record over and over again. There's so many different key position groups that can help shape what UCLA's 2023 football season will be in their final year of the Pac-12, and what might be the final year of Pac-12 being a relevant football conference before the Bruins and Trojans and Colorado Buffaloes all leave the conference to go to their various destinations. For UCLA and SC, it's the Big Ten, and Colorado to the Big 12. Most importantly for UCLA fans, I believe, it's who's going to be the starting quarterback. I know we want to see the defense play well, see some rotation and formation of what the running back room will look like. Who'll be catching patches and being a big key blocking up front in terms of offensive linemen, blocking, who's going to be catching passes from the tight end, all the new exciting wide receiving options. There's so many pieces that can move around here and there for Chip Kelly, but it might all start with who is the signal caller for the Bruins. Last time I talked about how Vegas was favoring Ethan Garbers. I've talked about my fascination and adoration for Dante Moore. And Chip Kelly has said at Pac-12 Media Days how he believes that, he says to make sure your team is going in the right direction. This is very wildly paraphrasing his quote. The simplest terms that Chip Kelly says is, I'm not just going to hand it to Dante Moore. That's not the words he said, but using the verbiage he used at Pac-12 Media Days, it's they've got to earn the job, and whoever wins it, the players can see it, the locker room can see it. If you give it to player B over player A, even though the certain player may have outplayed this player in practice, but because he's got name brand value and the hype, you're going to lose the locker room. That's basically what he's saying. In my interpretation, I think you would agree with that. If not, hit it in the comments. So basically, he's not going to hand the job over to someone. They've got to earn it, and he has a tendency, and maybe initially, to lean veteran. And nobody would maybe blame him to start Ethan Garbers going with the veteran option, and I don't think anybody would blame him to go with Dante Moore. And it's split. I know some of you guys are very frustrated with my thoughts on how I think it should be handled. Give it to Dante Moore. And I do agree, give it to the better quarterback. But, hey, how is it going to play out? Reading an ESPN article, as you'll see many more pieces and writing, pieces, articles talk about the college football season as we build into August. The most interesting quarterback battles across the country. There's many of them at plenty of big-time programs. UCLA has one of the most interesting quarterback battles because they've got quite a few people having their hands in the ring, but it's mostly come down to two options. Garbers and Moore, Schlee seemingly sticking out there in third, but things could change by the time fall camp comes around. The analyst, Adam Rittenberg, he wrote about his prediction, saying it's Dante Moore. Talks about how Dante Moore is talented enough to start right away, and there's not much downside to starting his clock immediately. And this is his perspective, what Rittenberg wrote. Unless Garbers clearly separates himself in camp, possibly due to experience, Moore should get the first shot in what looks like a bridge year for the Bruins before moving to the Big Ten in 2024. Is what he wrote on ESPN. That's kind of the mindset I'm sitting here. Let's see what the Bruins have. Let's see what Chip Kelly and UCLA has in Dante Moore. Now, if Ethan Garbers is completely outplaying him, if it's neck and neck, who do you go with? Do you go with the veteran safe option and try to win as many games before you have to hand the reins off? Do you do the dual quarterback system, which I don't think really anybody wins, nor will anybody be truly happy, fan base, players, anything? That would be a cop-out decision of sorts. But there's split opinions. Vegas says it's Garbers. I think it's Moore. I kind of fall in this reasoning alongside Rittenberg, who is predicting that Dante Moore will be the starting quarterback. And one can assume that in a piece written on ESPN that he's a guy in Moore that can start week one against Coastal Carolina. I've read more pieces about different intangibles. I think another one on ESPN about which freshman at certain positions has the best quality at a certain thing, right? A lot of mumbo jumbo to say. They wrote a section about how Dante Moore is the most ready in terms of a pocket passer, his pocket presence, unfazed at what goes around in front of him, and still can deliver the ball to all parts of the field with his pocket presence as a mature freshman, a top 5 recruit top 3 recruit, 5-star, one of the highest rated recruits UCLA's ever gotten, especially in the Chip Kelly era. This is a guy that will not be afraid at maybe if the UCLA Bruins have a subpar offensive line in front of them this year for whatever reason, despite hitting the portal hard to bring in pieces up front to give them a deeper offensive lineman, a deeper line room. Words are struggling right now. It's late. I got it. Whatever. They just need some depth at the offensive lineman position, right? On the O line. And the Bruins sit here, and if it's Moore who wins the job, it looks like he's got the intangibles for a young freshman coming from Michigan to play and throw the ball around. Garbers knows the system well enough to where the Bruins maybe don't need all that talent to be showcased, in which they can win ball games, hand the ball off, get the ball to the receivers who can go make plays for them to win games. What's the right move? Rittenberg says Moore. Vegas says Garbers. I think this. It's back and forth. It's just funny that it's kind of getting split between what people think, what I think, what analysts think. I'm with Rittenberg. See what the Bruins have and more. I know it would suck if Garbers plays his heart out in practice and doesn't earn that starting job. But if he really earns it, please start him game 1. Don't absolutely waste any time on Moore. If Garbers earns it in fall camp, give it to him. But I think Moore can maybe separate himself, but only time will tell. Only time will tell in who will be the starting quarterback. It's just fun to see in all these quarterback battles, different opinions splintering out as to who will win the job. There is another article written by Ben Bolch of the LA Times about how in the wake of the stuff that's been going on in Northwestern, the hazing allegations and everything in between, I read an article about Bolch and kind of pinpointed some parts I'd like to talk about where there's a bill that could maybe help these college athletes, which we'll talk about to finish off this Locked On UCLA episode. Welcome back. Final segment of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer, and there's a proposed bill going around, right, that is something that could maybe make it even tougher. Already Chip Kelly's been quoted, and some of these players have been quoted at the Pac-12 Media Days with the Northwestern allegations, the firing of now multiple coaches in that program, more players stepping out about that culture with future Big Ten foe in the Wildcats, about this new act that could be put in, a College Athlete Protection Act, which Ben Bolch wrote about in the LA Times. And for me, I'm trying to read it and kind of pull it up, but my laptop doesn't really want to work with me. But in the end, it's talking about player safety and athlete safety, and how I remember a piece that Bolch put in, how the NCAA can't truly regulate the hazing and everything in the locker room. They just can't do that. They don't do that is kind of what Bolch was putting in this article, and how there's a new bill coming up. Not that we're going to get political or anything in between, but how in this day and age, still in 2023, how we have this culture of hazing and this just bewilderment, as a big sports guy, why are we still doing these things, and UCLA's already talked about, and Chip Kelly's kind of known as a guy that has a no-nonsense type policy. They like to, as he's kind of put it in different words, I've gone over it on a different episode of Locked On UCLA, where he talks about if you're a freshman, if you're a super senior, you're a member of the program, you're going to get treated equally. There will be no favoritism. We make sure that we tell the freshmen every year that this is not acceptable. This is our culture, and that the Bruins have kind of a no-nonsense policy, right? They talk about their conditioning, their nutrition. They want to be a well-rounded program, and that's probably why Chip Kelly doesn't cater to certain types of players. Not that that's the reason why the culture is bad. That's a different type of thing as to what's going on at other places. But he goes after certain players. He goes after older, mature players and tries to instill the culture which he has now. And now there's even deeper things that are trying to protect athletes from just the ludicrous behavior at sometimes in these locker rooms that just really puzzles me about what really goes on, and how sometimes it's just lost in translation. Some coaches don't see it, allegations, everything in between. But, at some point, they've just got to get better at policing. I just don't understand it, especially nowadays. It just puzzles me sometimes. And the College Athlete Protection Act, go take a look at it. It was a good article from Ben Bulge. He probably puts into better words than I can and has a better, deeper understanding. But it's something that could protect UCLA, USC, even more athletes, in which case that, things like that don't happen and won't happen and will never happen, hopefully, at UCLA moving forward. And there's even some parts written in that article about a lawsuit from, the Jim Mora days about how injuries were mishandled and how that can change. It's not even just hazing. It's looking at injury prevention and stopping injuries and keeping players healthy. That's what we're talking about here. All these things put together into one thing. There's so many layers at keeping student athletes healthy, keeping collegiate, everybody healthy, especially when they're playing sports in college. And this could be the next wave of doing that. So go check out that Ben Bulge article. I think it's a good one, kind of interweaving a UCLA part into there with what the next day and age of keeping college athletes safe. It's an interesting one. In the meantime, for Locked On UCLA, we're going to get things moving and rolling. Apparently, I've had my background wrong the whole show. So, oops. All right, here we go. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time to end the show. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Go Bruins.